When I was a very young cop, we were given lectures about all of these famous crimes and how they were solved. And there was an underlying message. And that message was, this is your legacy. You have to step up to the standards of these men who went before you. And if you can't, then you should ship out. I remember an old sergeant saying to us when we were young cops, he said, always wear that uniform smartly. He says, better men than you have worn it before you. And some of them have died in it.
The main thing you do undercover is tell lies. And that's uncomfortable to go back to it and remember all the untruths, all the stuff you had to do to protect yourself and others. The only way to do it is to get close to these people, to be the friend, to be one of them. You can't think that you're a police officer anymore. In your head, you're not a police officer anymore. It's a part of your life that you don't really want to acknowledge. Mr. Wood, how are you?
I'm well, Simon. I'm very well. How are you?
I'm very well, sir. See how I slipped into calling you by your title there? Old habits die hard.
I'm pleased to see it. Pleased to see it.
I'm not standing to attention. You've let me off with that bit so far. Tom, former Deputy Chief of Broadening and Borders Police, have we discussed here in CrimeTime Inc. What a few months we've had here, putting together some of the tales of yore, from the World's End to the miners' strike just recently, and all the topics in between. The reason I'm going to ask you this, Tom, is because we're bringing the season to a close today. And that's unfortunate on one hand, because we're really enjoying this and we're getting a lot of feedback now from people out there across the globe actually listening to us. But later on, before we're finished, I'll give some details about how we're growing and how we're going to provide a platform for people to be in touch with us and let us know. Obviously, they're enjoying the show, that would be great. Otherwise, if they're not, if they've got some suggestions, fantastic. Really want to hear from people who would like to guest on the show, whether they're former policemen, whether they've been involved in a major inquiry, whatever. If they think that they want to have a voice, then CrimeTime Inc. is the place for them. And, of course, people who've got subjects and topics that we couldn't possibly discuss everything, given that we've already got a list of 100 topics to cover over the next months. So any suggestions from our listeners would be welcome, Tom. In the meantime, let's recap a wee bit over those 3 months, the 30 or so episodes that we've done. Have you enjoyed it, first and foremost?
I really have, Simon. Yes, I have enjoyed it. First of all, I've enjoyed the fascinating story about how you met Paul McCartney, which I've now been told so many times that it's actually ingrained in my brain somewhere, tragically. No, but seriously, I have enjoyed it.
What you're saying, you want me to tell it again? Yeah. Is that what you're saying here, Tom? You want?
Please, please, have mercy.
It was a summer's day.
Have mercy, have mercy. Think about the poor people out there. Think about our listening audience. They deserve a break.
There might be one that's not heard it yet,
No,
Tom.
There's nobody that's not heard it.
That's interesting, Tom, because it actually appeared, you won't notice it if you look at the episodes, it actually appeared when we had a guest, Donnie McIntyre, on, if you remember.
Oh, I do remember.
And we spoke about the Murder Mile in Glasgow. And in fact, we have to revisit that episode because the Murder Mile, it turned out it was a bigger story than we had legislated for when Donnie was on. And I think we need to get him back on in Series 2 and explore the other couple of murders that we neglected. But that's where the Paul McCartney story was for our listeners who are obviously desperate to hear it again.
I remember it well, but I was thinking about that one. I think there must be a lot of murder miles in Glasgow, where literally there's been it must be one long crime scene. But if we want to shorten the episode, how about making it the Solved Murder Mile?
Yes. Yeah. Tom, and you and I both know, I don't know about Broadening and Borders, of course, but in the West here, it's very few that slip through the net. 1% we're talking about. Probably less than that now with cold cases being solved every year.
Yeah.
I don't know what your detection rate was like, but we don't have many unsolved.
The trouble is, quite a lot of your solved murders end up in the appeal courts and things like that. I don't know. I'm not sure, technically. Anyway, look, I'm not going to dwell on that because it's churlish. And
Thank goodness.
That's not in the last episode. I've enjoyed it tremendously. We've covered a lot of ground. And I think I said before, but it's worth repeating again, that it's given us an opportunity to discuss in detail some of the nuances of these cases that we've dealt with that actually you cannot discuss in a radio programme, and you cannot discuss certainly in a TV programme where everything is compressed to 45 minutes. I think it's super. But like you, I would actually like to know what the listeners out there want to hear about. We've covered a lot of ground. In your own case, it's been ever decreasing circles, but we've covered a lot of ground in our long police service. And there must be things that people want to hear about, and I'd welcome the opportunity to hear and to develop our next series. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I've got a message in here already. Can we have more of Simon? The fact that I made that up on the spot is getting nothing to do with.
And you see, making it up on the spot, that's exactly the problem with Glasgow CID. You've hit it in a nutshell. Making it up on the spot.
I must have a word with the editor.
From the horse's mouth. From the horse's mouth.
Tom, our very first episode, we had a friend of yours and mine, George Barnsley, on with his campaign. You remember that far back?
I do indeed. And of course, there's been a breakthrough in that, because there was an announcement last week to say that the Queen Elizabeth Cross was being extended to emergency services. And that is very, very good news. And great credit to George and his campaign. He really has stuck with it. And I haven't seen any local press about it, talking about it, but I'm confident that will extend to the officers killed in Lanarkshire back in the 70s.
I keep in touch with George quite regularly. In fact, his Facebook site, the Lanarkshire Police Historical Society, which George is the chairman of and looks after, they're very active, especially with the holidays coming up, Easter holidays. In the summer, they're busy all over attending fetes and such, along with the fire service, the TA, all these kind of people that bring old police vehicles, they bring old fire engines and whatnot for kids to become familiar and get to meet real police officers and get a chat. So they do a lot of work. And I know that George is looking at another book to follow up his Lanarkshire Police Chronicles. Yeah. And I also know, Tom, as you do, that the stories in these books are fantastic and they really fit into our template here at CrimeTime Inc. So we must get George back on as well.
We must.
And I just wanted to update listeners about that.
George and some of his pals are coming through to join us in Edinburgh on the 18th of May at the old police headquarters at Fettes Avenue, where we're celebrating 50 years since that station opened. And unfortunately, it's one of these buildings that's cursed by this rack concrete, so it's not going to be there for long. And so we're inviting all our former colleagues, support staff, special constables, ex-cops, serving cops to come back for Fettes at 50. And George and his pals are bringing through quite a few of their old vehicles to join ours. Fettes at 50, 18th of May, Saturday the 18th of May.
Fantastic. Is there a website or some kind of place? Well, the Lanarkshire Police Historical Society will have something. And we'll make a point of getting something onto our website to give people information about that. Of course, Tom, in season 2, we'll be kicking off with a very important case. The murder of Yvonne Fletcher in London will be its 40th anniversary in April. It's a very important case in globally and for the British police, would you say, Tom? Very much, Simon. And it's one of these crimes that it becomes more remarkable with the passage of time. Because when you look back at it, I mean, I remember it happening. Everybody assumed that there'd be police action, that the people would be detected, that there'd be some diplomatic deal done and somebody would be delivered up. And the fact that they weren't, when you look back at it now, actually, really? How could that happen in the UK? It's absolutely unbelievable. That crime goes unsolved, even though they know full well who pulled the trigger. So it's a great story. And as always in CrimeTime Inc., we try to get it from the horse's mouth. So we'll have our colleague who's written a book about the murder and a colleague that was in the ambulance with her that day and made a promise to Yvonne to bring the culprits to justice. Great, Tom. I'm looking forward to that because we've got it in the can and it will be coming out in season 2 right away. Looking forward to it. Tom, I suppose the purpose of mentioning George and Yvonne Fletcher, etc., is that there are lots of campaigns across the country, lots of perceived injustices, lots of opinions out there, and that's really what we're canvassing for, is use us as the platform for these stories, and let's get it out in the open. As you mentioned earlier, Tom, We can go into the minutiae of the case. We can go into the detail of it without the headline grabbing, without the guesswork, and without the drama. We can get to the actual truth and the real nitty-gritty and help people promote their causes. Do you think that's a worthy endeavour for us?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's important too, because an awful lot of these campaigns are defined by a kind of tabloid headline. And they were so long ago that people actually have forgotten all the nuances of them. And so take Yvonne Fletcher as a very good example of that. In the episode that we've done on in Yvonne, we hear details which, and I've got a good knowledge of the case, but I'd forgotten. We bring back these details so that people get a good picture of it, exactly what happened all these years ago. And why it's important that we still keep pursuing these cases, because it is important.
What would you your favourite? I know that we've done a series on here. We did the World's End, and we did. What was your favourite part of the podcast to date? What was your favourite episode, if you like, if that's not unfair to ask you that, or a highlight for you?
Setting aside the story about Paul McCartney, of course, which I've enjoyed.
Of course, yeah.
I've enjoyed.
That's everyone's highlight.
I've enjoyed every time you've told it. Every time you've told it, I've enjoyed it. Quite favourite. Very difficult, because a lot of the things we have discussed have been very close to my heart. Cases I have known and written about, and people I've known and written about. But I suppose, the case which I'm most closely associated with is, and I've got a new book coming out about it in the summer, is the World's End Murders and the crimes of Angus Sinclair. The murders of Helen and Christine, two kids, two young girls just at the very start of their adult lives, and the 37-year investigation that went into solving their crimes and bringing Angus Sinclair to justice. I suppose that whole investigation in many ways defined my police service, and I ended up leading it, which was a huge privilege for me. So I'd have to say that's the one that always strikes me, because I was so involved in it.
Tom, having spoken to you and led you through those stories, not just the World's End murder, but also the Robert Black murders, I think a feature here on CrimeTime Inc. is we've had something that other podcasts could never emulate because of the emotion that you brought to it. You've told us about senior officers in tears at funerals. You've told us about the parents and loved ones of wee girls, 5 years of age and whatnot. I'm thinking Susan Maxwell, Caroline Hogg. You've taken us through these stories that have a real emotional impact on people's lives. And apart from thanking you for that, has that been a process for you of putting these things out properly into the world?
Yes, it is. And it's funny because, I've been speaking about the World's End Murders for many, many years now, but there's always something new to consider. There's always a new tangent to take. There's always something else. And I'm a great believer in questioning myself and thinking, what else could we have done that was better? How could we learn lessons? And sometimes when you're close to a thing, you're too close to the wood to see the trees. But standing back from it, as I've had a chance to do it, I think it's made me appreciate the whole issue and the whole learning about these crimes a lot better than I perhaps did at the time.
Yeah. And I think because of most of what we talk about, certainly most of what I talk about is 30, 20, 30, 40 years ago. What it does is conjure the images of all the police officers that have passed along the way during that period of time, some of whom sadly no longer with us, Tom. And I think the journey for me has demonstrated how every police officer currently, and I'm talking about today, owes a debt of gratitude to all of the officers that came before, in the generations going back to the early 1800s, which we go back to in season 2 with our Tales of Burke and Hare that we've already recorded. So that track that's been laid down by officers over a 200-year period is what we all rely on when we come into the job. And all of that experience and all of the systems and ways of working have evolved over that 200-year period. And I find that fascinating to be able to pay tribute to some of these now lost characters. Mm-hmm.
It also sets a standard. I remember in my introduction to the book I wrote on the Ruxton murders, I say that when I was a very young cop, we were given lectures about all of these famous crimes and how they were solved. And there was an underlying message. And that message was, this is your legacy. This is your responsibility. You have to step up to the standards of these men who went before you And if you can't, then you should ship out. I mean, that was more or less the message.
You don't just let yourself down in the job when you act unprofessionally or even, God forbid, illegally, but you let down those generations of officers who came before you and gave us the respect from the community, because respect is never a given. Right. It's always earned, isn't it? As a respect that the uniform gets has been earned over many years.
I remember an old sergeant saying to us when we were young cops, he said, always wear that uniform smartly. He says, better men than you have worn it before you, and some of them have died in it. That's what he said. And I always remember that.
Very sobering.
Yeah.
Very sobering. Tom, we talked about World's End. We talked about the Robert Black series that we did as well. What about some of the guests that we've had on as well? I mentioned the Murder Mile. What do you think the future holds for us here at CrimeTime Inc. with the guests that were... And we know that some of them, we've got some interviews lined up very shortly with some of the guests. What's your thoughts on that, the type of people that should come and chat to us?
I think there's huge potential there, Simon, for guests. I'd like people to step forward and volunteer as guests, and I think many will, because policing goes into a whole wide range of things. And I've had feedback on our podcast from teachers, from social workers, from people who lived in the area, from journalists, broadcast and print journalists. There's a whole wide range of people who have got something to contribute. And I hope that in Series 2 we can continue with that and actually expand on it and bring people from much wider disciplines in.
One of the subjects that we did do that with our guest, one of our first guests was retired Inspector Ian Andrew. And he opened a whole tin of worms for us by chatting about PTSD. And he was kind enough to talk about it, how it affected him personally and how he got help for it with the police. But that opened up a whole avenue of people getting in touch with us about the subject. And it's obviously something that we're going to touch on again and again as we go through the podcast. Was that a bit of an eye-opener for you to be able to bring that into CrimeTime Inc?
I tell you what was interesting about that for me was that everybody assumes that PTSD is some modern phenomena, something that people have made up recently. What was interesting about Ian's thing was there he was, I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, but a real grizzled, hardened old operator, really had been round the track a few times, as tough as they come, and yet he still suffered from that. And I think that was a revelation to me, because when I think now about some of the behaviours, things that happened in my early service, there's no doubt at all that people were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic stress syndrome. There's no question. And when you think about some of the things they faced, they would have to be. They wouldn't have been human if they hadn't.
Yeah. And it's something that we'll go back to, because there's so many avenues in that particular subject to go down. And again, it's something that people might find CrimeTime Inc. a platform for them to come on and tell us the experience. It's therapeutic to do so and might benefit other people along the way. So that's something that would be more than open to do that. Tom, what are some of the subjects that we haven't discussed and that we haven't got in the can for Season 2? Is there anything, I'm going to put you in the spot and ask you what we've asked the listeners to do, is tell me what subjects Tom is looking forward to discussing over the coming months and years.
I think that we've done quite well, and naturally, because of our backgrounds and the kind of areas of work we were involved in, we've talked a lot about serious crime and we've talked a lot about murder, because these are the headline grabbers and the long-running crimes and investigations that we've been involved in. But there's an awful lot more areas to policing than that. And I think we can expand in the next series and talk about some of the other areas of policing that may seem mundane compared with the investigation of murder, but actually comprise the bread and butter of police work and police investigation. And some of them will be funny. People like humour and they like light-hearted stories, albeit stories that carry a message. And I think that's something we should be thinking about and getting guests on to tell us stories along with it, so that we have a mixed diet, so that it's not all about murder and all about dreadful crime, but actually more about the everyday story of policing.
Fantastic. Tom, I can't wait. I can't wait for when you're going to try and be funny. Your granddaughter must have bought you a book or something, a joke book or something.
No, I've read.
Bring along.
No, it's not that, Simon. I've actually read your book. And so That's very funny. I'm not sure whether it's meant to be funny, but it's very funny.
No, it wasn't.
Oh, it wasn't. Oh, sorry.
You just keep reading that Paul McCartney story,
sorry,
don't you?
yeah.
Paul McCartney once said of me, "Who?"
He's not the only one, Simon.
Every day in the press and online and whatnot, there are topics that come up that are the topic of the day. Today, it was hate crime and the new legislation that's coming in from the Scottish Government to try and curtail certain aspects of society. And it's something that we really need to talk about because there's such a broad range of opinion out there about it. The other thing I saw today was about informants. Some stats about how much money Police Scotland spend on what you and I would call touts or snitches, how much Police Scotland are spending on informants, about £2.5 million over the last 5 years. And it's something that you and I can talk in detail about because we both ran informants and knew of informants before they were regulated, if you like, before they had to be registered or anything like that. And it was all very informal. And we both went over the transition into when they tried to formalise it. But people probably don't realise the politics of informants and how detectives can work against other detectives to try and protect informants. That'll be something to look forward to, won't it?
I think there's going to be huge repercussions from the steak knife investigation in Northern Ireland, Operation Kenova, I think it is. And steak knife was a participating informant of the most serious kind on the Irish Republican side during the Troubles. And there has been revealed there a whole lot of issues around about participating informants, about the management of covert human intelligence sources, etc. I think there'll be a lot more of that. And I think that will impact on the UK mainland as well as Northern Ireland. So I think the whole business about the ethical issues around about the running of informants, I think we've only seen the beginning of that. I think there'll be a lot more of that to come.
Yeah, for sure. And there'll be a lot of opinions that we can share here on CrimeTime Inc. Tom, another thing that I could have gone down the road more often, and in fact, I should mention that during the course of Season 1, we launched CrimeTime Inc. Extra. And our thoughts on that was to cover some of these more diverse subjects, or maybe more particular subjects that we wanted to put a spotlight on. And I used that to bring out some of the elite interviews that I had done. That's the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. Because as I've hinted at a few times during Season 1, I've got that campaign that I'm very much part of with colleagues to try and bring about change in our drugs law, our Misuse of Drugs Act of 1971. That's something that we'll return to time and time again. And I know that you've got opinions about it, and we'll maybe get some guests on here to chat about. Would that be good?
Unfortunately, Simon, there's no good news there at all. I don't know if you've noticed, but once again, this game of snakes and ladders with dealing with drugs and the problem of alcohol and drugs is once again, we've got record drugs deaths. And once again, just this week, I noticed that due to budgetary constraints, local authorities are cutting back on drug services. And it's absolute lunacy. It is lunacy. What part don't they understand? Have we not been around this so often that they don't understand? I absolutely despair. And as regards the hate legislation that's just come in, it's funny, I was paying particular attention this weekend. I was watching some football matches and some rugby matches. There's been a lot on sport on the television. And I was struck by how courteous and how complimentary the managers of opposing teams were after the match, complimenting their opponents and saying, we didn't do so well. Now, the people who are using the most hateful language at the moment are the very politicians who have brought these laws in, who go in for horrible personal attacks on their opponents. So it really does interest me as to who's going to be the first people to fall foul of this new hate legislation, which I have to say, I believe is totally unnecessary. There's already provision in common law, in Scots law, to deal with all of these things.
Totally.
Yet more zombie legislation. But I watched particularly some of these very close-run games. There was one I watched there, two Premiership English clubs battling it out.
Man United, Liverpool, were you talking about there, Tom?
Yeah, two of the top sides in the UK going hammer and tongs at each other into extra time, and couldn't have been more emotional. And yet the two managers were extremely courteous And I thought to myself, there's a lesson there. Whereas you get some of our politicians, and all they do is attack the opposition personally, not their policies. I just think, in terms of an example, I have to say that so far, the Premiership football managers are making a better job than some of our national leaders.
Most of the headlines when the news comes on, most days it's about somebody bringing emotion about somebody who's not done something or has said something or has omitted something. Every week we've got this drama going on. It's not what we're paying them to do. They snipe at each other all the time.
No, it's playground, and I don't know how we got into this, and I don't know how we get out of it. But it's very disheartening. It really is.
Yeah. Well, maybe we could ask another guest that we had on. We had on a crime reporter from The Sun, Graham Mann, who gave us a tiny insight into the tabloid press and the kind of work that they do behind the scenes, Tom. I found that quite fascinating.
Actually, I've got a guest who's lined up. I should have had her on this last series, but we never got round to it, who was certainly one of the leading female crime reporters in Scotland, who has a completely different viewpoint about dealing with the police service, about dealing with criminals, and all the things she had to deal with in between, sexist abuse and misogyny, as well as the normal knockabout stuff. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
That's quite a shocker to me. Not the fact that there's a female reporter coming on to talk about crime, but the fact that you've got a contact or a friend out there.
Thank you. Having just been speaking about personal abuse and the need for courtesy. Thank you, Simon. Thank you very much. One of the things from Series 1, Simon, is I was interested in your life as an undercover officer because while I've managed undercover officers, I've never actually been one. And I was interested in that because I think it must be a particularly difficult area of work. And I felt we touched on it, but I also felt that perhaps there was some raw nerves there. Yeah. And I backed away. But I think our listening audience would be interested in it. But to be serious for just once, what we don't want to do is go into areas which you have left behind and are pleased to have done so.
It's a fine balance. I think I've come to terms with it. It took me by surprise that night, Tom, that talking about it and skipping round it and trying to avoid talking about it is what I've been doing for 20 years to get away from it. The main thing you do undercover is tell lies. Your life becomes a lie. And that's uncomfortable to go back to it and remember all the untruths, all the stuff you had to do to protect yourself and others, and all the subterfuge that goes on. And let's face it, the only way to do it is to get close to these people, is to get trusted by these people, is to be the friend, is to be one of them. That's the word I'm looking for. And at least pretend that you're one of them for a lengthy period of time, when in actual fact, you can't think that you're a police officer anymore. In your head, you're not a police officer anymore until you have to pass the information on. So it is uncomfortable and was uncomfortable even going back there. And I had a sleepless night after we did it because I had just stirred some waters that I hadn't even acknowledged for a long time, because it's a part of your life that you don't really want to acknowledge.
I always thought that with managing UCs, I always thought that this business about their whole life when they were doing their job was one of deception. And it's very difficult, having made your whole life deception, for that not to carry into your personal life. And I was always conscious. And the fact is, to train a UC officer is very lengthy and very expensive. But if you leave people in that role for too long, then I think you risk doing them serious damage. And there was always this, it was like people working in the drug squad, Simon. I felt the same about that. People who were in the drug squad, you got into the culture of it. And that's where danger lay. And so, regardless of how proficient they were, sometimes you had to take them out, not just for the sake of the job, but for the sake of the person.
And they didn't want to come out, and they were good at their job, and they had lots of contacts by that time. They had lots of inroads into places that the police generally didn't have inroads into. And certainly in Strathclyde, at least, I'm trying to think how big our drug squad would be in the 80s. We're probably talking about 20 men and women. I would say at least half of them ended up, one or two committed suicide that I know of over the years. Certainly half of them divorces, maybe more than that. drink problems, all sorts of problems associated because they started to become part of the culture that they were trying to police. Which is very beneficial on one hand and very harmful to the individual on the other.
I used to take experienced detectives, detective sergeants, out of the CID and put them back into uniform for about a year or so before they came back in, and then usually up the ladder to detective inspector. And numerous times they would come to see me and say, "What have I done wrong?" And I say, "Nothing.
Yeah.
It's because you haven't done anything wrong. I want you to go out there and I want you to spread the gospel. I want you to teach the young people on your shift, the young cops on your shift, the craft of criminal investigation. You're the very people who can do that." And quite a number of times later on, they would say to me, "Fair enjoyed that year I had back in uniform.
Yeah.
Fair enjoyed it.
Yeah.
What a great bunch of people they were, and what good fun we had. And isn't it nice?"
Yeah.
And the pressures are different. Simon, here's a question for you. With the wisdom of hindsight, take a long, hard look. Were you left too long in that area of work for your own good?
Yes, totally. Tom, and that stems right from my early CID days, because I was young, because I was younger than you. I was looking at a picture of a detective training course today from 1976, I think, and there was hardly anybody in it under 40 years of age. They looked like a retirement course. But I was 24 when I went into the Serious Crime Squad. So I was used. I was used in all sorts of situations. I was used in the firearms operations as undercover. I was used undercover all the time. It became a thing that I loved. I was good at it. And then when I went proper undercover, there were no safety nets. There was none of what we're talking about now acknowledged. And when you burnt out, and that was the end of it, and they got somebody else. But you were just left to burn out. Thankfully, some of us understood what was going on. And there was a thing that I always kept in mind to ground myself. I couldn't trust anyone. I think that's the big problem, Tom, is that all the things you and I talk about on this podcast, we could read from the standing orders, we could see it from the manual, we could talk to great cops that we've met down the years and see how the job works. When you're undercover, all of that goes out the window. Talked a wee bit about informants there. All of that goes out the window where informants are involved as well, as you well know. Trusted inspectors, trusted gaffers can tell you a pack of lies to protect informants, and the whole thing becomes an absolute minefield. If somebody had done what you've just said, and I tried to do it, I remember a gaffer saying to me, "Simon, you've become a victim of your propaganda." Because to deal with Neds, to deal with real Neds on the streets, you need them to believe that you're capable of just about anything. You could fit them up, you could beat them up, you could jail them for any reason whatsoever. You have to let them believe that you're the most ruthless guy they're ever going to meet, because they have to be more scared of the police for that few hours in order to be of any use to us. But that impression that you're giving the Ned, your colleagues believe that as well, your bosses believe that as well, and nobody really knows in the hierarchy of the police. Thinking about guys like Joe Jackson, who was an absolute ruffian, and he got to detective superintendent. His bosses always had doubts about him and his methods, Tom. So it's that thin line. And what the gaffer told me was I needed a change of image. And what he really meant was I should have come out of the CID altogether and gone in uniform. Become a community man, or didn't matter. Something completely different to shake that image off. And the using that I was getting from the police.
Yeah, and just imagine you could have been a huge benefit teaching young ones, teaching youngsters. You would have bored them to death with your Paul McCartney stories. Once they got over that,
I had problems.
It would have been
I had problems at one point. My wee girl was really ill, and she was fatally ill. And I went to the commander, and he put me in uniform for a wee while, as I asked to be. And I went and saw Jack Baird and told him he was a detective super. And he was brilliant. Jack said, "Simon, we're not losing you from the department. What we're doing is gaining a detective in disguise, in uniform, on the street." And he was absolutely right, because the job is the job. And we should have been much more open to that, to moving people about and giving them different experiences. Lots of people were left in the admin for too long. They were left at the uniform bar for too long. They were left in situ for too long, because maybe it was expensive to train them. I'm thinking motorbikes, Tom, I'm thinking horses. All these departments had older cops in there who'd spent their whole service. And that was a shame for them and the job.
It was, and I have to say it was a fault of the organisations too, because they were thinking in very short term about the day-to-day efficiency. They were not thinking long-term about the welfare of the person, or indeed the development of the person. And that's why I made myself unpopular with many by taking people out and swapping them about and doing things. But I'd seen people who had been used by the organisation, but once they'd been used, they were burnt out. And often they developed patterns and habits. You've talked about heavy drinking. Heavy drinking was very common in my young day. And then, of course, they took all these problems home. And that's where you got broken marriages and real unhappiness, which in some cases led to premature death. And I'm not talking about suicide here. I'm talking about ill health, chronic ill health, brought about by lifestyle, by smoking and drinking, and premature death. Yeah, it was something I was very aware of because I'd seen it close at hand.
One of the parts of that, Tom, was adrenaline. Because when you, as you know, when you're in a high adrenaline environment with firearms and criminals and whatnot, it's addictive. And the cops that are on that front line become addicted to that adrenaline, and they're only ever happy when they've got that adrenaline flow. They seek it all the time. And to take them out and put them into uniform after that should have been managed. Hindsight's a great gift, isn't it?
It is, but you're right. Some of my happiest, when you're in a small team and you've got a single purpose, like the investigation of a murder. I was doing a broadcast there and somebody was talking to me about investigating murders of sex workers. And they were saying, the police don't try as hard when it's a sex worker. And I said, stop. You don't understand what you're talking about. When you're investigating a murder, it is the very peak of your professional task. And you would do anything to solve that crime. It doesn't matter who the victim is. It's just a complete misunderstanding of what makes detectives tick. Happiest days where you're on a murder, you're in full flow, you're like a pack of hounds chasing the quarry, and it has a tremendous feeling of esprit de corps and just that whole thing. And the adrenaline, as you say, the excitement, and the fact that you're there chasing down the ultimate in crimes and criminals, somebody who's murdered, somebody who's taken a life. I don't think any drug you could buy in the street would ever replicate that feeling, that tremendous feeling of huge excitement and success.
Tom, we've also covered the sex industry. We recently spoke about Sheila Anderson, the 2 episodes, fantastic insight again. But again, all of these subjects are things that are wide open for us to explore in much more detail as we move forward. I'm really looking forward to season 2. We've got lots of guests already recorded and lots more to come. And I'm looking forward to meeting you back here for that. Are you looking forward to it as well?
Very much, Simon. Very much looking forward to season 2. I'm going to reflect on season 1 and come back with more ideas and more suggestions for season 2. One little thing I would like, if you don't mind me saying personally to you, I'd like many more stories from you, perhaps about how you met a famous pop star.
Well, I don't like to talk about that. You know I'm a bit reticent about that. I hate the name dropping, Tom. We had a sports day yesterday, an open day for Sporting Memories Federation, which we work with in Walking Football. And it's a fantastic organisation. A friend of mine, Jim Purvis, brought it to us. And every week we have a meeting and talk about old sporting events, etc. And yesterday we had an open day and Billy Sloan came along, a friend of one of the lads that plays the Walking Football. Billy Sloan, the DJ, you know who I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yes.
One of Scotland's more famous broadcasters and still doing so in Radio Scotland, originally a journalist, and a friend of Steve Harley's who passed away at the weekend. But name dropping, you have never, he would still be going if I hadn't said, okay, Billy, okay. He's talking about interviewing Grace Jones in her bath, naked in her bath with just soap suds round about her. And funnily enough, him and I both met Paul McCartney, so that was interesting.
Just for the avoidance of doubt for the audience, was he naked in the bath, or was Grace Jones naked in the bath, or were they both naked?
He showed us a picture, would you believe it? And it was definitely Grace. It's a fantastic story. The other guest was Davy McKinnon that played for Rangers and Partick Thistle. And between the two of them, they could still be talking, telling us stories just now.
Yeah.
But he's met Muhammad Ali, he's met all these people, the names getting dropped all over. I've only got the one. Well, I've got two now. I've got Paul McCartney and, of course, Tom Wood, former Deputy Chief Constable of Broadening and Borders Police.
Yeah, I think we'll just leave it at that. I was once at a retiral function where everybody was, quite a number of people were well oiled, and this guy came up to me and he said, "You see you?" He said, "You've done great." He said, "You really like the way you do things. Absolutely tremendous. But you see that Tom Wood?"
Brilliant. Tom, the last thing I really wanted to get across here on our final episode of season 1 was that the break is not just for us to have a lie down, because we're still busy and active, as you know. It was really to get our house in order for all the people that want to get in touch with us, guests, etc. And for that reason, we've got a new website coming live very shortly, which people can find at CrimeTimeInc.com. CrimeTimeInc.com. And there, not only can they write messages to us, interact with us, apply to be a guest and tell us a bit about themselves, but they can even just leave a voice message if everything else is too much trouble. So that's a bit of tech, and it's a bit that our huge team in the background have been working on for a while now, and should be up and running shortly. CrimeTimeInc.com, and that'll open up a whole new world to us, Tom.
Look forward to it, Simon. I look forward to the new season.
And we'll be launching on Sunday the 21st of April. Sunday the 21st of April, and we'll be leading with the story about the 40-year-old murder of the London policewoman Yvonne Fletcher, tragically. Tom, been great again, going over our old ground, but we're onwards and upwards. Now that we've got our feet under the table here, Tom, I think we're ready to fly in season 2, and we've got some great stuff lined up for the listeners, haven't we?
Looking forward to it. Looking forward to it.
Next time on Crime Time Inc.
I thought someone had thrown a firework and Yvonne fell. I ran over to her, and then a few seconds later I heard the screams because other people had been shot. There were 2 gunmen. There were 12 or 13 Libyans shot and wounded, and we arrived at the hospital. I was shaking like a leaf. The doctor came in. He said, "PC Murray, we're taking her to theatre now." But roughly an hour and a half later, again I'm still there on my own. The same doctor came back. He had the green gown on, and there was some blood on it, and he was crying. And he said, "So sorry, we lost her." The internal injuries were far worse than we thought. The bullet went through her elbow, through her arm, into her torso, through her spleen, through her internal organs. And he said there was just nothing we could do. "I'm so sorry." And off he went.